The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before him, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like tired insects. Marcus had already stayed 3 hours past visiting time, and his shoes had worn a pattern into the linoleum near room 347. He should leave. He had work tomorrow. His phone battery was dying. Every rational thought pointed toward the exit. But then he heard it again, that fragile voice breaking through the silence, "Please don't leave me alone." He wasn't her son. He wasn't her family. He was just a stranger who'd knocked on the wrong door that afternoon, looking for his aunt's room, and found instead a frail woman with silver hair spread across a too-white pillow, her hand reaching toward emptiness. Marcus had frozen in the doorway, ready to apologize and leave, when she'd looked at him with eyes that held an ocean of loneliness. "I thought you were my Daniel," she'd whispered, and something in those words had anchored him to the spot. He'd taken one step inside. Then another. And somehow, 3 hours had evaporated while he sat in the chair beside her bed, listening to stories about a life he'd never known. Her name was Eleanor Hartman. She was 83 years old. Her son Daniel lived in Seattle, too busy with deadlines and conference calls to visit more than twice a year. Her daughter had died young. Her husband was gone 15 years now. The nurses were kind, she said, but they had too many patients, too many beeping machines demanding their attention. At night, she explained, the silence became so heavy it pressed against her chest until she couldn't breathe. "I'm scared of the dark now," Eleanor admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Isn't that silly? At my age, afraid like a child." Marcus had squeezed her hand. "It's not silly at all." Now, as the wall clock ticked past midnight, he watched her chest rise and fall with labored breaths. The heart monitor beside her bed maintained its steady rhythm, each beep a small reassurance. He'd called his boss, left a voicemail about a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. Somewhere along the evening, Eleanor had become family in a way that transcended blood. "Tell me about your mother," Eleanor said suddenly, pulling him from his thoughts. Marcus smiled, though sadness flickered behind it. "She'd passed when I was 17. Cancer." "Oh, sweetheart." Eleanor's fingers tightened around his. "You understand then." He did. He understood the desperate loneliness of hospital rooms, the way time moved differently when someone you loved was slipping away. He remembered his mother's final night, how she'd gripped his hand with surprising strength and made him promise to always be kind, to always see people, really see them. He'd been so young, so angry at the world for taking her. But he'd kept that promise. "She sounds like she raised you right," Eleanor continued. "You have her kindness. I can feel it." The night nurse, a woman named Patricia with kind eyes and tired shoulders, stopped by at 1 a.m. She brought Marcus a cup of coffee and Eleanor some water, adjusting the IV drip with practiced efficiency. "You're still here," Patricia observed, not unkindly. "I'm staying," Marcus replied simply. Patricia nodded, understanding passing between them without words. She'd seen too many patients spend their final days alone, had held too many hands herself when there was no one else. "You're a good man," she said, touching his shoulder briefly before moving on to her next patient. Around 2 a.m., Eleanor's breathing became more difficult. Marcus sat up straighter, alarm coursing through him, but she waved away his concern with a trembling hand. "It's just the pneumonia," she explained. "The doctor said." "Well, it doesn't matter what the doctor said. I'm tired of fighting, Marcus. So very tired." His throat constricted. "Eleanor. No, don't look like that." She managed a weak smile. "I've had a good life. 83 years of love and heartbreak and ordinary miracles. I buried my husband, my daughter, most of my friends. I'm ready. I didn't want to be alone when the time came. Is that selfish?" "It's human," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's the most human thing in the world." They talked through the deepest hours of night, when the world outside the window was nothing but darkness and distant city lights. Eleanor told him about her wedding day, about the house she'd lived in for 40 years, about her daughter's laugh and her husband's terrible jokes. She spoke of regrets and joys, of small moments that had somehow contained entire lifetimes. Marcus shared too, stories about his mother, about the career he was building as a social worker, about the girlfriend who'd left because he cared too much about other people's problems. Eleanor listened with an intensity that made him feel seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in years. "You're going to help so many people," she told him as dawn began to paint the sky outside. Your mother would be so proud. At 4:30 a.m., Eleanor's breathing changed. Marcus knew, somehow, that this was different. He pressed the call button but didn't let go of her hand. Patricia arrived within seconds, checked the monitors, and met Marcus's eyes with a gentle nod. Should I call someone? Marcus asked desperately. Her son, I can. Stay, Eleanor interrupted, her voice surprisingly clear. Please, Marcus. Just stay. So he did. He held her hand and told her about the sunrise beginning outside her window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He described the birds gathering on the ledge, the way the city was waking up below them, full of people starting their daily journeys, unaware that in this small room, a beautiful soul was preparing to take her final one. Thank you, Eleanor whispered, her eyes fixed on his face. For seeing me. For staying. For making me feel less alone. Thank you, Marcus replied, tears streaming down his face, for reminding me why I do this work. For reminding me what matters. Eleanor smiled one last time, squeezed his hand with what little strength remained, and closed her eyes. The heart monitor's steady beat became a single, sustained tone. Patricia moved quickly but gently, performing the necessary checks, but Marcus already knew. He felt the moment her spirit left, felt the air in the room shift and settle. He stayed until the sun fully rose, until Eleanor's son finally arrived from the airport, frantic and grief-stricken. Marcus stepped back, let Daniel take his place beside his mother's bed, watched the man crumble as he realized he'd arrived too late. Before leaving, Marcus touched Daniel's shoulder. She wasn't alone, he said quietly. I made sure she wasn't alone. Daniel looked up, tears coursing down his face, and nodded gratefully. Outside the hospital, the morning was crisp and bright. Marcus's phone was dead, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes burning with exhaustion. But as he walked to his car, he felt his mother's presence beside him, felt her approval warming him like sunlight. He'd kept his promise. He'd been kind. He'd seen someone who needed to be seen. And in the end, that's what made us human, not the grand gestures or heroic acts, but the simple choice to stay when someone whispered, "Don't leave me alone." To hold a stranger's hand through the darkness. To remind each other that we matter, that we're seen, that none of us has to face the infinite alone. Marcus climbed into his car and sat for a moment, watching the hospital windows. Reflect the morning sun somewhere inside. Nurses continued their rounds. Doctors reviewed charts. Families gathered in waiting rooms. Life continued its endless cycle of hellos and goodbyes. And he'd been there for one goodbye that mattered. That was enough.